It was an era that rattled American complacency. In 1968, assassins had violently cut off calming voices of peace. Martin Luther King, Robert Kennedy. The Vietnam War was growing more intense and, for Americans, worse. An African-American uprising had left Detroit in flames. So President Lyndon Johnson appointed a group headed by Illinois Governor Otto Kerner to study what caused the Detroit riots. The landmark report found the crisis in America was based on poverty and race, a nation profoundly split between black and white, rich and poor.
It was a shock to people in the nation, although it was describing what many had seen. Two nations divided, one black, one white.
This week, 50 years later, an update to the Kerner Commission report says by many standards, the rifts in American society have grown worse. Child poverty is up. 14% then, 22% now. School segregation has returned to 1968 levels. A yawning education gap between the number of blacks, whites, and Hispanics who go to college has widened.
I would oversimplify to say it's a governmental fault. I think it's a societal fault, right? I think each of us have a responsibility that if our government isn't reflective of what we need, to make sure that we lobby them and that we explain to them the importance and the urgency in doing the work. So I think part and parcel of the issue is absolutely the government and the way that their inability to really provide us with the additional supports.
The report blames budget cuts since the 1980s to poverty programs, desegregation, mental health, housing, and schools.
We haven't gotten there yet, but the goal of us to push us there, to center this event, to really talk about racism and classism in this space, as we have number 45 in office, it is our obligation to make sure we do that. We can no longer say that that's something we'll talk about 5 years from now. I don't want to be here 50 years from now talking about this again.
That is a wake-up call, the report's authors conclude, that has largely gone unanswered for half a century. John Hendren, Al Jazeera.
It might not be the vanguard of slang in the anti-SJW movement anymore. The leaders of the anti-SJW movement are no longer skeptics. These days, the mantle, the torch has been passed to the alt-right proper. But I remember during the era of Gamergate and the Trump election, the word regressive was everywhere in YouTube politics. Everywhere. Regressive left. Progressive leftist, and this term was lifted from speech that not Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens gave in the 90s about college kids regressing into an infantile state when complaining to the administration, when protesting and stuff like that. So all that aside, the purpose of the word regressive was to defame progressivism, was to sort of undermine the idea that progressivism was necessary in order for us to move forward politically. It was a struggle between liberals and progressives. Sargon wasn't wrong when, especially now that he's under the boot of the alt-right, Sargon wasn't wrong that he was a liberal, a classical liberal, right? Meaning in the global sense, in the historical sense, liberal means someone towards the center that wants to preserve the status quo. This person can be center left or they can be center right. And Sargonites were generally center-right, okay? The argument from progressives, that we were called SJWs, was that liberalism was not adequate, that the struggle is not over, that the epidemic of, for example, police violence against black Americans. One of the big Rubinite talking points that was directed at us was that the civil rights past had been, these battles had been won. that the Civil Rights Act had been passed in 1965, that Martin Luther King had already fought and bled and died, that liberalism was going to protect the victories of the 1960s. And what was important to me about spreading the video at the beginning of this clip is that progressivism is about being in a state of perpetual motion. You cannot stop being a progressive. You cannot convert to being a liberal, meaning that someone that, oh, well, gay marriage is accomplished, so gay rights are over. Or, voting has been desegregated. Or Jim Crow has ended, so racism is over. It's a perpetual fight. Because each step you take forward in terms of progress, each victory, you have to make sure that it's going to be implemented adequately. If you look at one of the statistics in the Al Jazeera video that I shared here, you'll see that we've regressed. If you want to talk about regression, we've regressed to a state of segregation in American schools, racial segregation, that we haven't seen since the 1960s. And some of the stats are even worse than they were in the 1960s. That's because, this position that marginalized people are in 2018 is the product of clawbacks. All this time that liberals in the Democratic Party have been telling us the war for civil rights is won. You guys, the battle for workers' rights have been won. They have been standing idle while Republicans have used gerrymandering, while Republicans have used backdoor legislation to basically make it impossible to get an abortion in certain states. They've used backdoor legislation and tax incentives and charter schools and other means of privatization to re-implement Jim Crow. But this time it's de facto. And the one thing that liberals won't, and again, liberals meaning like center left, center right, the one thing liberals won't help you with is a problem that's not explicit. That's another thing I guess people could think of from the Rubin Sargon model of language is, well, we're only going to help you if, we're only going to help you if discrimination against you is explicit. Because if it's not explicit, then we're going to make an accusation that everything, everything's misogyny, everything's racism, and you have to blah, blah, blah. Just because something isn't spelled out doesn't mean it's not happening. And actually, it's easier to impose, a state of oppression on people when you don't spell it out to the existing ruling class. You just do it. It's no longer de facto, it's no longer explicit Jim Crow. It's economic apartheid, and you use redlining and all kinds of other backdoor techniques, but you effectively keep a system of segregation in place. You keep a system of marginalization in place. So, okay, gay marriage is legal. Well, now we're going to make it that people don't have to make cakes for gay weddings. And that sounds stupid, right? But what you're doing is, with the gay wedding cake thing, is if they get their way and you can deny service to gay people because homosexuality, because gay marriage clashes with your beliefs, that starts a slippery slope of regression, because then that's just the first foot in the door to discriminate against gay couples. First it's cakes, then it's property, then it's during adoptions, then it's restaurants. That's another restoration of Jim Crow is I don't serve Muslims, it's against my political beliefs. You see, it's a slippery slope. So, I like to cite this quote from Chris Hedges, the idea that, I don't know if he got it from somebody else, but I'm going to cite him. The idea that, revolution versus rebellion, right? A revolution is a battle where an insurgent force replaces the existing order and sets up its own power structure. Eventually those power structures become corrupt and you need another revolution all over again. A rebellious population, rather than a revolutionary population, is in a state of perpetual resistance, and not like the lame Clinton corporate resistance movement, post-Clinton resistance movement, where everything is about just not liking Donald Trump, and the only thing that needs to be fixed about the existing order is to put Democrats back in place, and that's going to get everybody everybody's rights restored and economic justice and everything. We just need Democrats. I'm talking about resistance in the legitimate sense, that you will not be governed. You will not be governable. It will be impossible to oppress you. So no, the struggle for justice does not end. That's why you perpetually need progress. Because, okay, gay people are allowed to get married now. What about trans people? What about non-binary trans people? What about, okay, so black people can go to white schools. How do we keep that? How do we keep that victory? How do we stop white flight? How do we block a recreation of racial segregation in schools by white parents putting their kids in private schools and charter schools and shifting the public school system to vouchers and shifting the public school system into being funded by property taxes so that white schools are better funded than black schools. The struggle for justice and equality and fairness is unending, because the oppressor will always claw back. The oppressor will always give you an inch and take back a mile.